The tranquil town of Gateway, Arkansas, nestled amidst the undulating emerald tapestry of the Ozark Mountains, was the quintessential picture of bucolic American life. Its rhythm was dictated by the gentle cadence of the seasons, the comforting familiarity of neighborly interactions, and the predictable cadence of community events. The most significant disruptions to this peaceful existence typically involved minor traffic incidents, perhaps a spirited but ultimately amicable debate at the local town hall, or the occasional weather-related inconvenience. This idyllic tableau was shattered with brutal and irreversible finality in February 2017 by the horrific and senseless death of James Appleton, a man deeply and inextricably woven into the very fabric of Gateway as a long-serving and universally respected employee of the city's water department. His untimely and violent demise not only plunged his beloved family and countless friends into an unfathomable abyss of grief but also unearthed the chilling and malevolent undercurrent that had silently festered beneath the town's seemingly placid surface, ultimately pointing a damning finger of accusation at someone who had once sworn an oath to protect its very inhabitants. James Appleton was far more than just a dedicated municipal worker. He was an indispensable cornerstone of Gateway's close-knit community. For over 2 decades, his quiet competence and unwavering commitment had ensured the reliable and uninterrupted operation of the town's vital water supply. He was a man of understated integrity, renowned for his meticulous work ethic, his quiet dedication to his responsibilities, and the genuine warmth and unassuming kindness he extended to each and every person he encountered. His days were characterized by a steadfast commitment to his duties, invariably punctuated by a friendly wave to familiar faces as he navigated the town in his city truck, and his evenings were typically spent in the comforting embrace of his loving family, tending his small but cherished garden, a vibrant testament to his patient and nurturing soul. His sudden and violent absence ripped a gaping hole in the very heart of Gateway, leaving a palpable void that resonated deeply within the community's collective consciousness and a lingering sense of profound loss. The immediate aftermath of James Appleton's death was a period of profound shock, utter disbelief, and a suffocating blanket of grief that enveloped the entire town. The Gateway Police Department, a modest force accustomed to handling minor infractions, community disturbances, and the occasional lost pet, found themselves thrust into the daunting and deeply unsettling reality of investigating a crime of unprecedented severity within their tight-knit community. While the initial investigation swiftly determined the cause of death, a brutal and merciless assault that left little doubt as to the perpetrator's violent intent, the identity of the assailant and the underlying motive remained shrouded in a terrifying and perplexing ambiguity. Nevertheless, a resolute and unwavering investigation commenced, fueled by a deep and abiding sense of obligation to the memory of James Appleton and a growing, insidious suspicion that the answers to this horrific crime might lie uncomfortably and disturbingly close to home. As the agonizing days bled into weeks, the painstaking and methodical efforts of the dedicated investigators began to converge with increasing focus on a figure who was both intimately familiar and yet increasingly unsettling to the grieving residents of Gateway: Grant Hardin. Hardin had arrived in their quiet town during the summer of 2016, hired with a degree of hopeful anticipation by the town council as the new police chief. His appointment had been viewed by some as a necessary step towards professionalizing their small and somewhat understaffed police force, and Hardin had presented himself as a seasoned and experienced law enforcement veteran, possessing the requisite skills and knowledge to effectively lead and modernize their local police department. However, his tenure in this crucial position was conspicuously short-lived and marked by a palpable undercurrent of unease and discomfort among certain town officials, members of the police department under his command, and even some longtime residents. Whispers quietly circulated regarding his abrasive and often authoritarian demeanor, persistent disagreements over departmental procedures and community policing initiatives, and an overarching sense that Hardin's personality and rigid leadership style were fundamentally ill-suited to the close-knit and collaborative ethos that defined the town of Gateway. His abrupt and somewhat unceremonious resignation after only a few turbulent months in the role, vaguely attributed at the time to nebulous, personal reasons, had been met by some within the community with a quiet sense of relief, though tragically, few could have possibly foreseen the sinister and devastating connection that would later chillingly emerge between him and the brutal and senseless death of James Appleton. The intricate and painstaking process of definitively linking Grant Hardin to the murder of James Appleton was a testament to the unwavering dedication, meticulous attention to detail, and collaborative spirit of the investigators, seamlessly blending traditional investigative techniques with the burgeoning and increasingly powerful capabilities of modern forensic science. Detectives embarked on a comprehensive and exhaustive reconstruction of James Appleton's final days, conducting countless in-depth interviews with his grieving colleagues, heartbroken friends, and devastated family members, meticulously documenting his every known movement, interaction, and communication in the days and hours preceding his tragic demise. Simultaneously, they began to meticulously scrutinize the activities, whereabouts, and known associates of individuals who might have had any contact, however seemingly insignificant, with Appleton in the critical period leading up to his death, with Grant Hardin's name gradually and ominously rising to the forefront of their increasingly focused inquiries. A crucial and pivotal aspect of the burgeoning investigation involved a thorough and discreet examination of the professional dynamics and interpersonal relationships within Gateway's municipal administration. Investigators meticulously delved into any potential conflicts, disagreements, or underlying power struggles that might have existed among various city employees, paying particular attention to Hardin's interactions and relationships during his brief but undoubtedly impactful tenure as the town's chief law enforcement officer. It was during this delicate and crucial phase of the investigation that subtle but undeniably significant threads began to emerge, tentatively connecting Hardin and Appleton in ways that initially seemed innocuous but, under the harsh and unforgiving light of the unfolding tragedy, took on a far more sinister and foreboding significance. These seemingly minor connections involved the painstaking scrutiny of communication logs, the meticulous documentation of witness accounts detailing interactions between the two men, and the rigorous and often frustrating process of attempting to verify Hardin's alibi for the time of Appleton's death, an alibi that investigators found to be increasingly inconsistent, contradictory, and ultimately, unconvincing. The decisive and irrefutable breakthrough in the agonizingly slow but determined investigation came through the meticulous and painstaking analysis of physical evidence meticulously recovered from the meticulously documented crime scene. While the specific and sensitive details of this crucial evidence were deliberately and strategically withheld from public disclosure in order to safeguard the integrity of the ongoing investigation and any potential future legal proceedings, it is understood that forensic scientists conducted a thorough and exhaustive examination of the precise location where James Appleton's lifeless body was discovered. This involved the meticulous collection and rigorous analysis of even the most minute traces of physical evidence, latent fingerprints, microscopic fibers, shed hair samples, and crucially, biological material that held the potential to yield definitive DNA profiles. This painstaking and often tedious forensic work ultimately yielded irrefutable and scientifically sound links that directly and unequivocally placed Grant Hardin at the precise location where James Appleton was brutally and senselessly murdered. The specific nature of this pivotal forensic evidence remains largely confidential to this day, but its undeniable significance in definitively identifying Grant Hardin as the primary suspect and ultimately the perpetrator of this heinous crime cannot be overstated. Furthermore, the dedicated investigators diligently and methodically worked to establish a credible and legally sound motive for Grant Hardin's unspeakable act. While the full intricacies and nuances of this underlying motive were never publicly aired in their entirety during Hardin's subsequent plea agreement, it is highly probable that the relentless investigation unearthed compelling evidence of a significant and deeply rooted conflict, a simmering personal grievance, or perhaps even the possession of sensitive or incriminating information by James Appleton that Grant Hardin desperately sought to suppress or silence permanently. The precise nature of this underlying motive remains a subject of hushed and often speculative discussion within the tight-knit Gateway community, adding yet another layer of unsettling mystery and profound sadness to the already tragic events. However, the existence of a compelling and legally defensible motive was undoubtedly a critical and foundational component of the prosecution's ultimately successful case against Hardin. Confronted with the mounting and increasingly irrefutable weight of the damning forensic evidence and the intricately woven and increasingly constricting web of compelling circumstantial links meticulously uncovered by the dedicated investigators, Grant Hardin was eventually brought in for a series of intensive and probing interrogations. While the specific details and transcripts of these crucial interviews remain confidential, it is highly probable that Hardin initially maintained a steadfast facade of innocence, vehemently and unequivocally denying any involvement whatsoever in the tragic death of James Appleton. However, as the investigators methodically presented the irrefutable scientific findings and the glaring inconsistencies and outright falsehoods within his own increasingly convoluted statements became undeniably apparent, Hardin's carefully constructed wall of denial likely began to crumble under the weight of the undeniable truth. Ultimately, faced with the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence arrayed against him and the daunting prospect of a lengthy, highly public, and almost certainly unwinnable trial, Grant Hardin made the calculated decision to enter into a plea bargain in October 2017. He formally entered a guilty plea to the charge of first-degree murder in the senseless and brutal killing of James Appleton. The subsequent courtroom proceedings were a somber and emotionally charged event that cast a long shadow over the usually quiet and unassuming town of Gateway. The formal entry of the guilty plea brought a tangible, albeit profoundly grim, measure of closure to James Appleton's devastated family and the deeply traumatized community, finally confirming their darkest and most unimaginable fears, that the individual responsible for this horrific crime was not a faceless outsider but someone who had once held a significant position of authority and public trust within their own cherished town. Hardin was subsequently handed a sentence of 30 years in prison, a punishment that many within the grieving Gateway community, while acknowledging the legal ramifications and the constraints of the justice system, felt was woefully inadequate to truly compensate for the profound and irreplaceable loss they had collectively endured. Hardin was subsequently remanded into the custody of the Arkansas Department of Corrections and incarcerated at the North Central Unit Prison in Calico Rock, settling into the stark and unforgiving reality of life as a convicted murderer. For several years, an uneasy and fragile semblance of normalcy gradually began to return to the wounded town of Gateway. The raw and jagged edges of collective grief slowly began to soften with the passage of time, though the poignant memory of James Appleton and the deeply unsettling circumstances surrounding his tragic death remained an indelible and painful scar etched into the town's collective consciousness. It appeared, albeit with a lingering sense of profound sadness, that the tragic chapter of James Appleton's demise had finally reached its somber conclusion. However, the dark and disturbing narrative of Grant Hardin was far from reaching its final, chilling page. In the year 2025, while Grant Hardin was serving his lengthy sentence for the murder of James Appleton, significant and groundbreaking advancements in the field of forensic DNA analysis led to a chilling and unexpected breakthrough in a long unsolved and particularly heinous cold case dating back to 1997. In that year, a brutal and terrifying rape had occurred in Rogers, Arkansas, a community located a significant distance from the small town of Gateway. The courageous victim of this horrific and deeply personal crime was Amy Harrison, a dedicated and universally beloved schoolteacher within the Rogers community, who had been left with profound and lasting psychological trauma as a result of the violent assault. Despite an extensive and dedicated investigation by the Rogers Police Department at the time of the crime, the perpetrator had remained frustratingly unidentified, casting a long and oppressive shadow of fear, injustice, and unresolved trauma over Amy Harrison and the entire Rogers community for nearly 3 agonizing decades. The agonizing lack of closure had served as a constant and painful reminder of the limitations of forensic technology at the time and the elusive nature of justice. Nearly 3 decades later, as part of routine and ongoing cold case reviews and the application of increasingly sophisticated and sensitive DNA analysis technology, biological evidence meticulously collected and carefully preserved from the scene of Amy Harrison's brutal rape in 1997 was re-examined and uploaded into the burgeoning state and national DNA databases. This seemingly routine procedure yielded a shocking and horrifying match. The previously unidentified DNA profile belonged unequivocally to none other than Grant Hardin, the man already incarcerated at the North Central Unit Prison for the brutal murder of James Appleton. The stunning and deeply disturbing revelation that Grant Hardin was definitively linked through irrefutable DNA evidence to the brutal rape of Amy Harrison nearly 3 decades prior sent an even more profound and visceral wave of horror, disbelief, and revulsion through both the grieving community of Gateway and the long-suffering community of Rogers. For Amy Harrison herself, the long-awaited news brought forth a complex and overwhelming cascade of intensely conflicting emotions. The profound relief of finally having her attacker identified after enduring nearly 3 decades of uncertainty and fear, coupled with the chilling and deeply unsettling realization that this violent individual had been living within the same state, and had even held a position of significant authority and public trust, while she continued to grapple with the enduring psychological trauma and emotional scars inflicted by his violent crime. For the residents of the Rogers community, the news served as a stark and unwelcome reminder of a dark and painful chapter in their collective history and a chilling illustration of the insidious ways in which violent predators can successfully conceal their depravity and evade justice for extended periods. This stunning and deeply disturbing discovery led to Hardin being formally charged and subsequently convicted for the brutal 1997 rape of Amy Harrison. The subsequent legal proceedings, including the powerful and deeply emotional testimony of Amy Harrison herself, further underscored the profound and lasting damage inflicted by Hardin's long history of violent and predatory acts. He received an additional sentence of 50 years in prison, to be served consecutively with his existing 30-year sentence for the murder of James Appleton, effectively and unequivocally ensuring that he would likely spend the remainder of his natural life behind the cold, unforgiving walls of a correctional facility. The communities of Gateway and Rogers, particularly Amy Harrison, who had bravely carried the heavy burden of this unsolved crime for so many agonizing years, found a measure of grim and hard-won satisfaction in this additional layer of long-delayed justice. It finally seemed that the full and terrifying extent of Grant Hardin's depravity had been brought to light, and that he would ultimately be held accountable for the totality of his past and present transgressions against innocent members of their communities. However, this fragile and hard-earned sense of closure was shattered with brutal suddenness on the morning of May 27, 2025. On this fateful and deeply unsettling day, in a development that sent shockwaves of fear and disbelief across the state of Arkansas and far beyond its borders, Grant Hardin managed to orchestrate a daring and seemingly improbable escape from the confines of the North Central Unit Prison in Calico Rock. The precise and intricate details surrounding his audacious and meticulously planned escape remain the subject of an intensive and ongoing investigation by correctional authorities and law enforcement agencies, but preliminary reports suggest a calculated and potentially pre-planned operation that exploited vulnerabilities within the prison's security protocols. Initial and unconfirmed findings indicate that Hardin may have cleverly and disturbingly utilized discarded or stolen clothing that closely resembled official law enforcement uniforms as a key element of his elaborate escape strategy, chillingly suggesting a significant degree of premeditation, cunning, and a disturbing exploitation of his prior experience and knowledge of law enforcement procedures. The stunning and deeply alarming news of Grant Hardin's successful evasion of custody immediately triggered a massive and highly coordinated multi-agency manhunt that spanned local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Significant personnel and resources were swiftly mobilized and deployed in a desperate and urgent effort to locate and apprehend the dangerous and now at-large fugitive. His physical description, detailed history of violent crime, and potential escape methods were rapidly disseminated through all available media channels, and the public was urgently warned that Grant Hardin should be considered extremely dangerous and should not be approached under any circumstances. The fact that he had previously served as a law enforcement officer himself raised particularly grave concerns among investigators regarding his potential knowledge of police tactics, his ability to anticipate their movements, and his increased capacity to evade detection. For the already deeply traumatized residents of Gateway, Grant Hardin's brazen escape has been a devastating and terrifying development, brutally tearing open the still tender wounds inflicted by the senseless murder of James Appleton and shattering any semblance of peace and security they had painstakingly attempted to rebuild over the preceding years. The chilling and deeply unsettling prospect that the very man who had brought such profound darkness and violence to their once peaceful town could once again be at large has cast a palpable pall of fear, anxiety, and renewed vulnerability over the entire community. They, along with Amy Harrison and the residents of the Rogers community, are now forced to grapple with the terrifying and unwelcome reality of a violent and unrepentant predator once again at large, posing a significant and immediate threat to public safety. Hardin's audacious escape has also ignited a firestorm of intense scrutiny, criticism, and demands for accountability directed at the security protocols and potential systemic vulnerabilities within the Arkansas correctional system. A comprehensive and thorough internal investigation is undoubtedly currently underway to meticulously examine the precise circumstances and security lapses that allowed a high-risk inmate like Hardin to successfully evade custody, with the urgent aim of identifying any critical failures and implementing robust and effective measures to prevent similar dangerous incidents from occurring in the future. The incident serves as a stark and alarming reminder of the constant vigilance, unwavering commitment to security, and ongoing evaluation required to ensure the secure confinement of individuals who pose a significant and demonstrable threat to the safety and well-being of the general public. As the intensive and far-reaching search for the escaped convict, Grant Hardin, continues with unwavering determination, the communities he has so deeply terrorized can only cling to the fervent hope of a swift, decisive, and safe resolution. The immediate and unconditional recapture of Hardin is not merely a matter of routine law enforcement procedure. It is a fundamental imperative for restoring a semblance of safety, a sense of long-delayed justice, and a fragile hope for future peace to the innocent individuals and close-knit communities whose lives have been so profoundly and irrevocably shattered by his violent and reprehensible actions. The enduring memory of James Appleton, a good and decent man whose life was tragically and senselessly extinguished, and the renewed fear instilled by Hardin's escape serve as stark and painful reminders of the enduring consequences of violent crime and the paramount importance of unwavering vigilance and relentless pursuit in the ongoing quest for justice and the fundamental protection of public safety. The nation watches with bated breath and collective apprehension, fervently praying for the swift and safe apprehension of a dangerous and desperate fugitive and the eventual return of a lasting and genuine peace to the long shadows that still linger over the towns of Gateway and Rogers. The successful recapture of Grant Hardin is not just about bringing a dangerous criminal back to justice. It is about allowing the wounded hearts of these communities to finally begin the long and arduous journey toward true and lasting healing and the restoration of a sense of security that has been so cruelly stolen.